Hi, I'm Franklin, and this is Law School Strategy, How I Graduated from Law School with a Job. How I Graduated from Law School with a Job is a series of interviews with practicing attorneys to find out more about their legal careers. The purpose is for you to hear about other legal professionals and how they became employed and started their career following law school, or in some cases, how they relaunched their careers at a later stage. It's not just young lawyers that we'll be talking with, but attorneys across all levels of experience and practice areas. The purpose isn't to try and prove the legal job market is perfect, because it's not, or convince you it's easy to get a job and there are a ton of jobs out there, because there aren't. However, I do hope you gain some insights, ideas, tips, or other pieces of advice that can help you in your law school strategy. Because I do believe that if you work hard, follow the advice that we share, you'll be closer than ever to graduating from law school with a job. On this episode, we have attorney Alison Monahan from San Francisco, California. Hey, Alison.
Hi, thanks so much for having me.
Yes, thank you for joining us. So I'll go ahead and kick it off with the first question. Why did you go to law school, and what did you do leading up to law school?
Well, that's actually an interesting question. I'm not sure that I have the best why I went to law school ever story for you. I guess it's instructive. I was definitely not one of those people who thought my whole life like, oh, I really want to be a lawyer. I did a bunch of other stuff. My undergraduate degree was in sociology. I was also pre-med. And then I did a master's in architecture, which is a strange divergent path for someone who ends up in law school. So 3 years of architecture school. And at the close of that, I decided I didn't really want to practice architecture. And I actually went and became a computer programmer. So I was a programmer. I graduated architecture school in 2000 at Berkeley. This was right on the cusp of the first .com bust. And so, in 1999, when all of my friends had these tech jobs, and I was thinking like, oh, this sounds great. Like I can get one of these too. How hard could it be? So I kind of spent like that year of 99 to 2000 teaching myself how to code, like learning how to build databases. And I was like, oh, this is so great. Everything's going to be so awesome. And then in March of 2000, 2 months before I graduate, the NASDAQ crashes. And, I remember the day literally that the NASDAQ crashed, and suddenly, I was living in Berkeley. A bunch of my friends were working in these tech companies, and it was like someone turned the lights out. Like overnight, it went from huge boom, like anyone can get hired, to there are no jobs, like no one is hiring. And so I naively was like, well, how hard can it be? And so I graduated in 2000, May 2000, and finally found a job in October of 2000, I think it was. And I actually found a job working as a programmer, which was amazing because I basically had like almost no experience. And so I did that for 3 years. But, 2000 to 2003 was like a really terrible time in the tech business in San Francisco. And the company I was working for was kind of going nowhere fast. And at lunch, basically, after this horrible staff meeting where the CEO is like, we're going to have to start laying people off, like we're cutting everyone's salaries, hiring freeze. And I went to lunch with, I think 3 of my colleagues, and we just said, look, we have to do something else. Like everyone at this table has to figure out what they're doing next, because obviously this is not working. Now years down the road, we see .com 2.0, we should have just stayed there probably. But, hindsight being what it is. But no, literally everyone at the table made a life-changing decision on the spot. One of my friends was like, I want to be a winemaker. He went back to school, got a degree. Now he's a winemaker at Napa. That was probably a lot more creative than me. Because what I said was actually, I want to move to New York. And, I just always thought like, why not New York? And someone said, well, what are you going to do in New York? And without even thinking about it, I said, I guess I'll go to law school. And, everybody just kind of looked at me and they're like, you're a programmer. Like, you can't just go to law school. Like, people don't just do that. And I was like, well, why not? Because basically the fastest way to get me to do anything is to tell me that I can't do it. So, I went home, basically was like, what do I need to do to go to law school? Looked up, I was like, well, the LSAT's coming up in a couple of weeks. Looks like I need to take the LSAT. Looks like I need to file some applications. And then, 6 months later or so, I'm standing in the building at Columbia Law School going, oh my gosh, how did this happen? So I'm not sure that it was really particularly well thought out, to be honest.
That's an amazing story and definitely one of the most unique ones I've ever heard.
Yeah, I guess on some level I had a sense that like I would probably be pretty good at it. It kind of aligned with the things I was naturally good at, which architecture school definitely had not aligned with. I was a very, very bad architecture school student. I still think I learned more there than I learned in law school, but that's because I was starting from basically like less than zero. And yeah, but going back to things I'd always been kind of good at, reading, writing, making arguments, those were things I could kind of handle. So yeah, it was not really particularly well thought out. And I do not suggest that other people do that.
Definitely. So now the question that everybody wants to know, did you graduate from law school with a job?
I did, because I went to law school. I started law school in 2003 and I graduated in 2006. So again, like timing being everything, I was basically graduating into the biggest boom for, legal hiring that you could imagine in probably a generation. So it was, to be honest, like not that hard to have a job at that point. I think things are pretty different now.
Yes, definitely. So if we back up a little bit to your law school career, what did you do throughout your 1L, 2L, and 3L life to do an internship or clerkship? What did you do with the mindset of I'm going to graduate with a job?
Well, I mean, I was at Columbia. So basically, really all you had to do at that point was kind of show up to OCI. And I mean, it sounds obnoxious, but it was basically true. Like if you were there, like someone would give you a summer associate position. Although in fairness, I had a terrible experience my second summer. I actually got a cold offer and like couldn't go back to the firm that I was working at. I had worked actually at a law firm my first summer as well. So like I had that option. But basically what I ended up doing was applying for clerkships. And so that's what I did, was I got a judicial clerkship.
Great. And so when was that again that you did the judicial clerkship?
That was 2006, 2007.
Okay. And what other, did you have any other internships that you had through OCI?
Well, the clerkship was my first job, basically.
Okay.
So, I mean, my hobby, I joke, was being a summer associate. So I actually summered at a firm in New York my first summer. Again, different era. You could do that. So I had basically had like an offer to return to the place that I'd worked my first summer. Second summer was a total disaster. Did not work out, was not a good fit. And then I actually sort of pre-clerked at a different firm in Boston before my clerkship. So I essentially had summered at like 3 different places and had offers from 2 of those places and didn't actually take either of those.
Got it. So what about involvement outside of internships? What about with bar associations or with any student associations? Did you get involved at that level?
Yeah, I mean, I was definitely kind of a joiner, not so much bar association stuff, but like I was, the board of like half the clubs at the school, and, it was all like, I mean, honestly, probably the most like career beneficial thing I did was that I was on the law review.
And what kind of doors did you see that opened up? I mean, obviously you're in Columbia, so.
Yeah, no, I think particularly for clerkships, like that was definitely a credential that people were looking for. It wasn't absolutely something people needed. I had tons of friends who got clerkships that were not on the law review, but I think it definitely helped. I'm not sure firms cared all that much, to be honest. I mean, it didn't hurt, but maybe there were some that disqualified you if you weren't on the law review, but as long as you're on like some journal, I don't think most of them really cared that much.
So what did your job search look like when you were about to graduate? It was pretty easy, is from what it sounds like.
Well, I mean, basically my like real first job search was when I basically like this 2L summer was a disaster. And I was like, all right, I have to get a clerkship, like that was how I was going to, and it was, the process then was a little more formulaic. Like you basically applied on a certain day and they did interviews in a certain week, and it was all very like compressed. And so for me, like that was really what I focused on, was like getting the strong.
Was that for the clerkship? Because obviously your 2L summer didn't lead to a job.
Right. So my thought process was like, okay, this is kind of a mess. I have like a place I can go back to, but like, this is not like probably my first choice. How am I going to reposition? And the repositioning was something I wanted to do anyway, conveniently, which was get a clerkship. And I also was having trouble deciding, do I want to work in New York? Do I want to work in San Francisco? Like I couldn't decide where to take the bar. I couldn't decide where I wanted to live. So I had a lot of uncertainty like in my 3L year that basically I figured could be kind of papered over if I just got a clerkship, had a year to kind of figure out what I was going to do. And again, like that was a different market at that point. Midway through the year clerking, I could send a couple of emails to places, firms in New York, firms in San Francisco saying, hey, I'm interested in working for you, and actually get responses and offers.
Exactly. Completely different time from what it sounds like.
I mean, I don't really think that. I mean, I'm sure you can do that, but it's not going to be as easy.
Yes.
So that was 2007. That was basically like right before the bust.
Got it. So were there any times that you struggled or faced any challenges throughout law school?
Well, sure. I mean, who doesn't? Yeah, I mean, I think the whole job thing is actually a real struggle. I mean, just partly for me, I was surprised that you were sort of expected to make these decisions so quickly and so early about like, you kind of go in thinking like, oh, sure, I want a job when I graduate. But I remember December 1st of my first year, like stamping envelopes and like sending them out to try to get a job for the next summer. And, sending hundreds of these. So it was basically like, now you'd probably just do the email, but at the time you actually had to like, put your stamp on and like sign it. I remember my roommate and I were sitting there with our like, nice Crane's paper and like signing things and stamping them in assembly line fashion so we could send them out on this one day. We're sending hundreds of these things just on the off chance that like someone might want to hire us for that summer.
So did your background play any role at all in deciding what you were going to study throughout law school? Because obviously you mentioned you had a computer science background and with coding and stuff. So did that play a role at all in maybe studying IP?
Weirdly, no, although I ended up doing patent litigation. So I actually never took an IP class. I don't really know why. I just didn't. I did take a clinic that was about lawyering in the digital age that was interesting. But yeah, for me, like I never took patents. I never took trademark, copyright, any of that stuff. But it was really when I was clerking, when those cases, I was clerking in a federal district court that had a fair number of patent cases. And so particularly when those software cases started coming across my desk and the judge is like, oh, you can actually understand what they're talking about. Like you read code. And it was like, oh, this is kind of cool. Like I have the code for this really well-known product sitting on my desk. And I think that really helped me get the job that I ultimately got because, patent litigation is still kind of booming, but at the time, 2007, 2008 was massively booming. I had this background where I could read code, I could talk to engineers, I just had a comfort level and like familiarity level with that world that most lawyers don't. And so that particularly when I was applying to firms in San Francisco was like a highly valuable skill set.
Great. And so can you kind of fast forward a little bit after that? Where are you now and what are you doing?
Well, after doing my time in the firm, I think I did, 3 years maybe. Like most people sort of said, this is probably not really what I want to be doing for the entire rest of my life. The money is great, but at some point the money is not really worth like selling your every hour of your day. And, doing patent stuff was that was also really demanding because like all of my cases, I think, were in Delaware. So your choices there were either your cases are in Delaware or they're in the Eastern District of Texas. Thank God I never had to go to the Eastern District. But that was actually what finally facilitated me leaving my law firm job was I was assigned to a case that was going to be happening in the Eastern District of Texas for like months and months on end. I had actually gotten a ski cabin with some friends in Tahoe for the season. And, my boss came and was like, well, so it looks like you're going to be spending the winter in the Eastern District of Texas. And there was this moment of like, yeah, I don't really think that's going to work for me. I have a ski cabin. And so basically I quit in like January of 2010, at least in part so I could go ski. And yeah, after that, basically I had started this project that became my first website, which was the Girl's Guide to Law School, while I was still in law school. And I thought I'd write it as a book. And so I started writing this book and then that was taking forever. And so I launched it on the web kind of thinking like, well, I'll just take what I've already done, do some SEO, put it up there, see what happens. Why not? I was a programmer. I have a design background. How hard could it be? And people like really quickly, SEO actually works. People very quickly started reading the site and responding to it and like sending me emails within a few days with like their entire life history and what should they do and looking for advice. And I was just like, oh my gosh, like what have I done? And so through that, I actually met my now business partner, Lee, who was doing some bar tutoring and law school tutoring. And so now we have websites that basically the law school toolbox and the bar exam toolbox, where we do tutoring, online courses, and lots of free content, and also a podcast for law students and people who are struggling with the bar. So, I mean, if you told me in law school that I would somehow end up running a business, I would have been like, no, that'll never happen. Like, I have no interest in that. But you can't really predict how these things turn out sometimes.
Exactly. That's so true. So can you talk a little bit about what experience business-wise you've been able to learn and you've had to learn on the fly running your own business? Because that sounds like
pretty much everything. Yeah, that's definitely, I mean, it took us a while before I think Lee and I were both comfortable saying like, oh, we're actually running a business. For the first year or so that we were doing the law school toolbox, we had like the worst elevator pitch ever. People would meet someone at like a bar association event or something and they're like, oh, what do you do? And you can't just say like, oh, I'm do patent litigation at firm X. Now you got to come up with your own story. And God, we were saying the worst things like, well, I used to be a lawyer, but now and it's like, no, that's terrible. So at some point we just started saying we were running a media empire, which is sort of kind of what we do. But now we just tell people basically what we do. But no, I mean, you have to learn everything. Like I knew nothing about marketing, certainly knew nothing about like hiring people and like finding the right people and managing those people. So I think there's like a huge learning curve. I mean, even basic stuff like, filing taxes or like retirement stuff. I mean, all this stuff, none of it is impossible, but there's definitely, law school does not prepare you to run a business.
It's definitely not, unless you do the joint program with an MBA at the same time. And then
but honestly, I'm not even sure an MBA like qualifies you to run a business. I mean, it's like, I took corporations. Did that like qualify me to incorporate? No. Like luckily we have the internet. So you go and everything you need to figure out, you're basically like, all right, how do I incorporate in California? And you go to Google and you're like, how do I incorporate in California? And then up pops like bizfilings.com. And you're like, oh, this doesn't look that hard. I bet we can fill this out. The point is like, I think a lot of people want to start like their own practice or something. And it's easy to get intimidated by like all the stuff you don't know. But the reality is, at this point, there's no way you can't learn it. I can guarantee you there is a web page or a YouTube video out there somewhere where someone's like, here's how you incorporate a law firm in California. Pretty sure you can only do like a PLC, but don't quote me on that.
Great. So what advice would you give to students that are thinking about, if I can use the term non-traditional route,
Sure.
Following law school? What advice would you give to them? Obviously, you just said it's pretty easy to Google and find out how to do things, but what are some key pieces of advice you would share?
Yeah, I think the key thing is just like you really have to trust yourself and you have to trust your judgment. And if you're going to go away from, the sort of like standard path or what's perceived to be like the secure path, like people are going to push back on that. Your school wants to be able to check a box that says like you have a salaried job 9 months after graduation and that salary is high. Like that's their incentive. You can't go, there may be people at your school, but typically you're not going to get a whole lot of encouragement to like take a different route from these people who have a vested interest in you following the path. But I think one thing to realize is that even if you get sort of, these firm jobs or these things that everybody thinks that they want, that's not really a long-term solution for most people. You're just kind of punting it down the road. Like, look at the statistics on how many people who start as associates become partners at a given firm. It's like, we're talking like 1 in 100 or something at this point. And it's like, okay, maybe you're going to be that person, but most likely, even if you get that, like, you've got like the fancy big law job in New York, you're set for life. It's like, you're not set for life. You still need to be figuring out like, what's your next step? Like, are you positioning yourself to do that next thing? Are you out there like meeting the people that are going to help you do that? Are you developing the skills that are going to help you do that? Sometimes I think law students are trained to be a little bit passive. And like wait for someone to tell them what to do. And the reality is like, you've got to hustle, like there are people who are out there hustling. And if you're not out there hustling, those people are going to get the job or like, take the path that you want. And there's nothing that's stopping people from doing what they want. I think Seth Godin is kind of right about this, where he's like, you've got to pick yourself.
Great. So I know there are some law students that might be about to graduate. They're looking at taking the bar exam either in February or next summer. So two questions for you. Are you still actively licensed and do you still practice? And then what if you don't, or if you do, either way, what advice would you recommend to those students that are just about to take the bar exam or preparing to take the bar exam? And they know for sure that they don't want to go this traditional route or even do law. Would you recommend right out of law school to get the bar exam out of the way in one state at least, or would you?
I think so.
Think it's fine to put it on hold?
No, I think you may as well take it. If nothing else, it gives you that fallback option of like, you can always go be a lawyer if you have to, which enables a lot of people to take like more risk because all right, worst case scenario, I can be a lawyer. Like, I can feed myself. For me, I actually took the bar in Massachusetts where I clerked because I couldn't decide whether to take New York or California. And so I remember going in and telling the judge like, I can't really decide which bar to take. Like maybe just I'll put it off for a little while. And he just looked at me. He's like, you need to take the bar. It's like, I don't care where, but you need to take it someplace. He's like, why not take it in Massachusetts? And I was like, well, I don't really want to stay here probably. It's too cold. And he's like, look, the Massachusetts bar has a 90% pass rate. He's like, go look at the pass rates of California and New York and tell me which one makes the most sense for you. And so I looked them up and I was like, I'm going to take the Massachusetts bar. And the thing is like, for me, it didn't really matter. Eventually I took California too, but I was doing patent litigation. Those by definition are all federal cases. So once you're admitted someplace, you just, you pro hoc in and like sign a piece of paper and suddenly you're admitted in Delaware for that case. The problem I see, and we see this sometimes with people that we're working with for tutoring for the bar, is once you put it off, it's really hard to go back. There may, some people have very legitimate reasons like family stuff or whatever, but typically speaking, I feel like you should just take the bar, get it over with, take it once, one and done. And then, frankly, like I'm retired in Massachusetts and inactive in California. But if I ever want to go back and I, want to get a job as a lawyer or I want to start a firm or whatever, I literally like check a box, send them some back payments, and like I'm a lawyer again.
Excellent. I think that's really, really great advice because like you said, if you can just get it out of the way, then that's something that you can always fall back on if things don't work out, whatever your plans might be after law school.
There's an interesting book I read by the founder of LinkedIn. I can't remember the name of it right now, but he basically says like everybody thinks like, oh, you need a plan A and a plan B. He's like, but that's not really right. You need a plan A and a plan B, sure. But really like, what's your plan Z? Like if everything goes to shit and like, you have to make money, like what are you going to do? He's like, and if you have a really good answer to that question, that makes everything else a lot easier. And for me, it's like, well, if this whole business thing just falls apart, like I can't pay the bills, I'll go back and be a lawyer.
Excellent. So we're almost out of time. So I wanted to give you a chance to share some places and resources that students can go to find you and connect with you and the services that you and your partners provide.
Sure. Awesome. Well, you can go to the Girls Guide to Law School, which men are welcome to read as well. That site's not super active at this point, although I'm trying to get it more active, but there's a ton of like back content. When I first started out, I was writing like 3 or 4 posts a week personally. So there's like a lot of stuff there. Someone once referred to it as the Wikipedia of law school, which was pretty much my favorite compliment ever. The Law School Toolbox and the Bar Exam Toolbox, which are, as they sound, lawschooltoolbox.com, barexamtoolbox.com. Those have great stuff. And then one of our most recent things that's been really interesting that we've been doing for about a year is the Law School Toolbox podcast. So if you go to lawschooltoolbox.com/podcast, you'll get all of those episodes. It's also on iTunes, but I think people really enjoy that. It's basically a half-hour episode once a week where Lee and I usually talk to each other. Sometimes we talk to other people about like the whole law school experience. So if anyone has suggestions, things you want us to talk about, we would be more than open to those.
Excellent. Thank you so much for sharing those. And thank you, Alison, for joining us today and sharing all this awesome insights and some background into how you accomplished everything that you've accomplished so far.
My pleasure. Thank you so much for having me. I really enjoyed it.
So people can obviously reach you through the website. Are there contact forms there where they can reach out to you directly?
Yeah. All the websites have contact forms. I think they're all /contact us. I don't know. They're all linked to, you can find it. Or you can just email me. I'm Alison, 1L, at thegirlsguidetolawschool.com.
Perfect. I love that email address.
It's pretty great.
And thank you everybody for watching today. And remember to subscribe to get future episodes of How I Graduated from Law School with a Job. Until next time, I'll see you later.